I really enjoy being a father. I really love having, my daughter, and I think it's made me a better person and more responsible person. If you try to talk to everybody, you end up with fluff that doesn't resonate with anybody. And I think it's the same thing when you're doing things for your thought leadership from a personal level. Welcome to Before We Get There, the podcast where we explore people's journeys, how they got to where they are, what keeps them pushing forward, and where they eventually want to get to. I'm your host, Nicholas Brayman, and this episode is going to be a bit different than our usual ones. Today, I'm going to share some reflections on this year, 2024, as well as the first 9 episodes of this podcast. Then you'll get to hear selections of 2 podcasts that I guested on recently. The first is the Thought Leader Club podcast with Cheryl Lau. Cheryl is a veteran podcaster who shares her knowledge on content creation and thought leadership. This was a super fun episode, and actually was one of the catalysts for me to start this podcast. I had never really considered starting a podcast before, but after being on with Cheryl, I realized that I really enjoyed it, and more importantly, that I would prefer to be the one asking the questions than the one answering the questions. I've always been more of a listener than a talker, so it made perfect sense to me. And if you listen closely, it's pretty funny because near the end of the podcast, she asked me if I have any upcoming projects or plans to do anything new, and I said I didn't. And then less than a month later, I actually launched this podcast because of the conversation that I had with her. The second selection is from Dad Dialogue with Lawrence Chinery. Lawrence is a father of 2 boys from the UK. He is currently a stay-at-home dad in the Netherlands. And he started his podcast to create connections with other fathers and share stories, successes, challenges, and see how much we have in common with other fathers. So I really enjoyed talking to him and talking about fatherhood. We talked about my journey of being a father for the past 2 years, some of the cultural and practical aspects of parenting in Singapore, including the education system, raising a family abroad, which we are both doing, and much more. So I hope that you enjoy the selections from these 2 episodes and that it helps you get to know me a bit better, since on this podcast, I am the one doing more of the listening than the talking. I think it'll be nice for you to hear more about my story, or at least these 2 areas of thought leadership and being a dad. So I'm very happy to share those with you. But before we get into that, I'd like to look back a bit on 2024, because I think it's been an amazing year for me. It was my first full year at a new company in a new role, and I feel that I was quite successful, and I'm especially happy that I'm getting to work with some of the most amazing colleagues that I've ever had the pleasure of working with throughout my whole career. And one of the main focuses this year for me, of course, was my daughter. She went from just starting to walk at the beginning of 2024, and then you look at her today, she's a bubbly toddler. She doesn't hardly ever stop talking. She loves to swim. She's starting preschool in a few weeks, in 1 week, almost exactly 1 week after the new year. She's grown a ton this year, and it's been a lot of fun to see her grow and to be able to experience that with her. I think it's really an amazing age when they grow so fast and change so much all at one time. I also started my weekly newsletter in February, the Weekend Wind Down. If you haven't heard about it yet, it's published on LinkedIn as well as my own website, and I will put the link in the show notes. And in this newsletter, actually talked about it a bit on Cheryl's podcast, but it's just a quick read where I share a few interesting things each week. This includes things like podcast episodes that I enjoyed, books that I'm reading, news on marketing or tech or AI, gadgets I'm using, and just a variety of different things. It's just a way to wind, as the name says, wind your weekend down with some nuggets of things that I have been thinking about or learned or read this week. And We are at just over 650 subscribers. So it isn't huge, but it's been really rewarding to sit down and write each week. And I'm proud that I've been consistent publishing it. I only missed 1 week so far. So that's been a great experience, and I plan to continue doing that. It was also a really nice year of travel for me because I got to go to a lot of places that I've never been to before, including India, Taiwan, Australia, and Japan, most of those for work trips. I got to explore. I enjoyed exploring all of those places with the time that I had outside of working. And I've developed a routine or a set of activities that I like to do in each place that I travel to. I might share more in another episode about that because I think that it really makes traveling more enjoyable for me. But of course, in those places, the food, hiking, going to local jiu-jitsu gyms were all great. Some of the highlights for me were probably in Lonavala. I visited a hill fort that's outside of Mumbai. And then around Sydney, I hiked around the North Head and went to the quarantine station. My daughter and I got to pet giant tortoises and capybaras at a farm in Ilan in Taiwan. And in Tokyo, there was one night that I got completely lost in Golden Gai and ended up at a bar where no one spoke English. And I just sat there and watched them have their interactions for a couple of hours while I enjoyed the drinks and the atmosphere. So that was super fun. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you for listening to Before We Get There. I hope you enjoyed our episode so far. This will be the 10th episode, but I am really happy and proud of what we've put out. All of the guests have been amazing, and it has been an honor talking to them and learning more about their stories, which is the goal of the podcast. And when I go back and I'm doing clips for social media or rewatching or re-listening to some of the podcasts, I'm actually very intrigued at the lessons that everybody has shared and the different perspectives. I really enjoy that we've had such a variety of guests. I say in the about section or the intro to this podcast, we talk to entrepreneurs, we talk to creatives, athletes, business leaders, and just a variety of people that give different perspectives and have different lessons to share. And I hope that you are enjoying that as well. I want to keep up this variety and actually have a really cool list of guests lined up for next year that I can't wait to share with you. So I am very much looking forward to 2025. We'll have more guests, probably from more places, not only from Singapore, but across Southeast Asia especially, and likely beyond that as well. So I hope you have a great rest of your holidays and a wonderful end to your year, and enjoy the selection from my 2 guest episodes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Thought Leader Club podcast. Today, we are going to talk to Nicholas Brayman, who is, in my eyes, known for his LinkedIn newsletter, The Weekend Wind Down, among other things as well. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because although a lot of the conversations on this show has been focused around folks who are using social media and personal branding for their business, I really think that Nicholas is going to bring a different perspective to this show because he's going to be talking about building a personal brand and online presence through LinkedIn for reasons outside of building a business and specifically for career. So I think that this is going to be an angle that is relevant to a lot of listeners. So I'm super excited to dive into Nicholas's experiences. Without further ado, to get the conversation going, let's have Nicholas introduce himself. Nicholas, who are you and what do you do?
Well, first of all, Cheryl, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here today. A little bit about myself. I'm originally from Seattle, but I've been living and working in Asia for a total of about 15 years, the last 10 here in Singapore. So it's definitely home now. I'm a marketer by trade. I've been focusing on in the B2B tech space for the last 8 years or so. And currently I lead a marketing team that is covering the APAC and Japan regions for my company, Kariba, which is a fintech solution provider based out of the US. And other than that, I spend a lot of time with my daughter. I have some hobbies. I do jiu-jitsu and like everybody else, enjoy traveling and reading and cooking and eating and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think there's a lot of different things that we're going to dive into in this conversation because you're such a multifaceted person. And it feels like from the outside looking in, you have such a well-rounded life. So maybe to get the conversation going, what is this newsletter about and why are you being active on LinkedIn?
Sure. So I've been on and off active on LinkedIn for probably about eight or so years. At some points, more active than others. But I've built a pretty, I would say, strong network. I have a lot of connections, both virtually, that people that I haven't met in person, but a lot of now at this point in my career, ex-colleagues, business partners, and that sort of thing. And I've had my own website for a few years. I do some blog posts and that sort of thing. But the newsletter really came about because I wanted to find a way to keep myself active on LinkedIn, but I didn't want to commit to having to write blog posts every week or even every month. I wanted some way that was a little bit lighter, more flexible, gave me the ability to focus on different topics. And I was going to experiment to start.
Hey, wonderful. So I think the natural question that's coming up for, I'm sure listeners as well, but me in particular is, okay, so Nicholas, you have a full-time job, you have a young child, you have family, I'm sure you have many hobbies. There's a lot of things going on in your life. How do you even make time to write this newsletter?
Yeah, that actually comes into partly the schedule. So I publish on Sunday evenings. So I did that for a couple of reasons. First of all, timing wise, it is a convenient time for me to have all weekend to do whatever I want to. Usually it ends up happening I start on Sunday morning and finish in the afternoon, but I don't have work commitments that I need to do at that time. And the second reason, which you may find interesting, is that I actually, because a lot of my connections on LinkedIn are my boss and my boss's bosses and people from my company, I actually didn't want to publish it during business hours and have people question if I'm spending my working time doing this side gig, side project kind of thing. So I put it on Sundays. Okay, there's no conflict of interest. There's nothing. That was one small thought in my mind when I set the schedule.
Why specifically did you choose LinkedIn? Why a newsletter? Why are you building? Because essentially the way I see it is that your newsletter really is encapsulating, to a certain extent, it is encapsulating your thought leadership, your ideas, your viewpoints on certain subject matters, not just one subject matter, but a few of them or more.
As a full-time employee, a corporate employee, and with no plans in the immediate future to be an entrepreneur or a solopreneur or do my own thing. So first of all, I want to keep my professional and personal life somewhat separate. So Instagram is definitely, I keep my profile private. I really only add people that I know in real life. A lot of it is friends back home that I don't see very often. And that's the only way we talk, or people that have moved other places. But also for future proofing is the closest phrase I can think of, like specifically publishing on LinkedIn, even posting stuff beyond just reposting my company's updates, which a lot of people is what they use LinkedIn for. It's like building out a very long and consistent resume that lives online. And I can't ever say for sure, or no one's told me specifically that, oh, I checked your LinkedIn and that's why I want to do business with you, or why I thought let's hire this person or anything. But I think in this day and age, it definitely happens for almost everybody. If you have a modern, forward thinking and looking type of company and team, of course they're going to check your LinkedIn when you talk to them. And again, not only for the external visibility, but also for my own as a marketer. We often find that marketers are not very good at marketing themselves. They're good at marketing for their job and for their company, but marketing for yourself still seems like maybe a little bit too cheesy or a little bit too full of yourself kind of thing makes people uncomfortable. Even writing resumes, talking about your achievements and accomplishment can be uncomfortable for some people. And so again, I'm not trying to position myself as the expert marketer out there, right? There's tons of people, millions of people who have more experience than me, who my people on my own team, much less everywhere else in the world, right? So it's more about expressing myself and sharing who I am. And I think that can come through as authentic. And if people know who I am, they feel closer to me. And again, I think if people happen across my profile and they're digging in and read an issue or two of the newsletter or read some of my blog posts, they get a much better picture of who I am rather than just a list of job titles and where I went to school.
I think what you shared is likely going to be very reassuring to those who are listening to this specific podcast, because from my conversations with the listeners who are not entrepreneurs or not starting businesses, they're in a job, but they want to build something online, whether it's a newsletter or a podcast or a blog. What I want to segue into next is the idea of thought leadership. Nicholas, what is your definition of thought leadership?
Again, going back to what we were just saying about, I am not and wouldn't want to and couldn't position myself as one of the top marketing or B2B marketing or tech marketing people in the world. But it really relates back to, I told you, one of my hobbies is jiu-jitsu. And so I do relate a lot of things in life back to jiu-jitsu. I've been doing it for about 5 years now, 4 or 5 days a week. And there's always people that are, quote unquote, worse than you. But the reality is can learn. Maybe a better way to put it is there's always people that you can learn from, and there's always people that can learn from you, even if it's your second day of training. And so I think that I've taken that mindset into thought leadership, where what I have to share, there will be millions of people who already know it, who are more experienced, maybe have deeper thoughts about it and longer experience with it than I do. But there's also millions of people who know less about it than I do. So I am not a top expert, but I do have things worth sharing and that other people will find valuable. So I guess to put it simply, thought leadership is when you're able to share something that provides value to others. Take an armbar, for example, a jiu-jitsu move. I've had classes that have taught the armbar several hundred times at this point. It's a very common move. But even at this point, sometimes there's just something in the way that the coach phrases something, or maybe I'm just paying attention at the right moment. Something clicks with you quite often, and even black belts who've been training for 10 or 20 years will tell you that this happens. It's just sometimes there's something that clicks and you go, oh, I never thought about it that way before, or, oh, that really helps me, and it just fits. So even if it's not groundbreaking, something cutting edge that nobody's ever heard before, there's still value in sharing your thoughts and your opinions. And especially, again, when you do it in an authentic way, like I would never write a blog post and say, this is the best B2B LinkedIn strategy, so you should read this article. First of all, I'm going to run out of content really quickly. And then second of all, it's not authentic, it's not true. But if I can share insights I've had or lessons that I've learned, again, many other people probably have learned those lessons before, but it's me sharing how I learned it and what the result was and what it means to me that is unique. And nobody's going to replicate that. If you stay true to yourself and you give your authentic voice, and that comes through the article, again, it doesn't sound like ChatGPT, it's not generic. If you try to, in marketing, it's a principle, right? If you try to talk to everybody, you end up with fluff that doesn't resonate with anybody. And I think it's the same thing when you're doing things for your thought leadership from a personal level. You shouldn't try to sound like you're the smartest. You shouldn't be talking about things that are not. You should be talking about things that, in a way that are personal to you and authentic to you. And when you do that, even if you're talking about something that people have heard before, it's going to come through in a genuine way, and it might click with some people.
And I think what you said earlier about jujitsu when I asked you what is your definition of thought leadership, and you explained your viewpoints through the lens of jujitsu, I think was exactly exemplifying what you just said about being authentic and sharing it from your point of view, and how even if it's not groundbreaking, can you share it through your lens? Because when you share that example or your interpretation or definition of thought leadership through the lens of jujitsu, I was like, I have never heard anyone say it like that. So I'm genuinely curious to know, with so many different things in your life, like what is your stress level on a weekly basis? Let's start there. What is Nicholas's stress levels on a weekly or daily basis?
That bad. I think it's personality, but it also is having that balance already. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you are able to have balance, you have family time, you have hobbies, you have activities, you have work. First of all, the things outside of work, I try not to. And there's certainly cases where it doesn't work, where we have challenges that we have to go through that are stressful. But like in a good week or a good day when things are flowing smoothly, whether I'm going to the gym, whether I'm taking my daughter out for a walk to the playground or taking her to the pool, whether running errands, doing all that sort of thing, when the balance is already there in the first place, none of those things are work or job adding to the stress. They're taking away the stress. I think it's hard to get there if you're not. The challenging part is to get to that point where you do have that balance. But once it's there, again, one of the things I wrote about in my newsletter, I think it was this week, was that I've actually been out from the gym for almost a month. I was traveling and then I got injured on my first day back. And in the past, that used to stress me out a lot because, I'm missing out on training time. I'm becoming unfit. I'm so frustrated that I'm not able to go to the gym, that I'm injured or sick or what have you. And this time it was really noticeable for myself that I didn't feel that stress at all. I was not happy that I was injured, didn't feel good, but it's okay, this happened, and now there's going to be a few weeks of downtime while I let it heal up. And there were so many other things going on in my life and work life and personal life and as I mentioned in that newsletter, it's been long enough, and this probably can relate back to creating content and being consistent. It's been long enough that I've been training jiu-jitsu and going to the gym and doing weightlifting and combat sports that I know that I'm going to go back. It's not like it's going to go missing as a part of my life. So I don't have that. I'm able to say, if I have to take a month off, I have to take a month off, but it's always going to be there. It's a part of my life. It's part of who I am. And so the stress or the worry, the unhappiness about missing out or not being able to do that part of my life for a period of time wasn't there.
That's so interesting, because I know a lot of people who I've spoken to, they've shared with me how when there is something that they have been working on building consistency for, whether it's posting weekly on LinkedIn or going exercising or something, whatever it is, right? They've been working on being consistent, but then life happens and they break their streak for whatever reason. But for some people, it really weighs heavily on them. They feel very discouraged. But it sounds like for you, you have a lightness, like a very light. Sure, like you might be annoyed, you might be disappointed, but like overall, it feels quite light. Like you're not like letting it really weigh you down. So one thing I would love to know is, how are you so chill about these things? Do you have certain routines or practices that you do, or is it more like just your natural temperament? Like, how are you so chill?
My wife, first of all, probably not say that. I'm this chill as you think I am, but no, I am. I'm definitely very chill. I think part of it is definitely temperament and personality. But again, going back to what you just mentioned about people feeling if they break their streak, they messed up or they have lost out on an opportunity or something like that. I think that's just time and experience. Like I said, I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 5 years. That's 5 days a week, thousands and thousands of times I've trained jiu-jitsu. And so when it gets to that level, probably like yourself for podcasting or for posting on social media, if you miss out on what or something doesn't go exactly the way you hoped it would, or maybe you post at the wrong time. Ideally, you should post between 9 and 11 a.m., but you forgot about it and it goes out at 12. It probably rolls off your back quite easily compared to somebody who's on their first or second episode of a podcast, right? Because you have all that experience and you know that it's not going to affect things in the long run because are already going to be consistent. And even if there was one episode that gets less views than a lot of other episodes, it's not the end of the world.
I really love the point about how if you have been committed to practicing consistency and practicing certain skill sets and putting in the reps, eventually, yes, life will happen, but you have that skill set, that consistent muscle in you. And it's not a big deal if you have to take a break for whatever reason. And that's also why it's important to start now, like start practicing those reps like now. So if anything happens, you're good. You're going to be chill about it. So Nicholas, as we start to land a plane for today, I would love to know, what are you working on moving forward? I know there's a lot of things going on in your life, but what are you working on? What's going on these days for you?
Yeah, nothing too new on the horizon. Being consistent again with what I am doing and continue to be doing everything I'm doing better. With my daughter, spend more time with my daughter, as much time as I can with my daughter. I'm still fairly new at my job, so I'm building my team up. And we have nearing the end of the year, so there's always a lot of work to do. And then just, again, there's always plenty of things to get better and do better at, but no big projects or anything like that. I do enjoy this format of podcasts, and public speaking is something that I've been doing a bit more of and probably would like to continue that. But again, no formal plan or pressure or anything. It's just something that I myself would like to continue doing.
You know what? I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you could speak into existence, let's just say, a speaking opportunity or podcast interview opportunity that you would love to make happen, what would you like? What are you looking for? If listeners happen to know connections, what would be a great fit? What would you love to make happen? Let's speak it into existence right now.
Just because I think it's the most fun one, I would love to sit down and have a conversation with Tim Ferriss. And he always has such interesting, intelligent people on his podcast, and he's such a good interviewer. The way he asks questions that, I think it'd be fascinating. I'd probably rather be the one interviewing him than him interviewing me, but that would definitely be something on the bucket list.
Okay, we have this in recording. It'll be out in the public at some point soon. So who knows if this clip will reach him. Okay, Nicholas, any final thoughts or takeaways you want to share with the audience? Just any last words?
Yeah, I think just one point, going back to the jiu-jitsu metaphor and what you took away from it. I think one of the keys is not only to not pretend to be something that you're not or to be better than you actually are, but also that you do have something to offer no matter your experience level, no matter how capable you feel. Because that's the other part about jiu-jitsu is you feel like trash every day. It's literally a fight. You're literally getting in a fight with people every day, right? So people are lying on top of you, twisting your body into positions that they're not supposed to be, and you're getting beat up. So most people, you don't feel that there's never a training session from 98% of the practitioners where you quote unquote win. Like, we don't talk about winning and losing in the training and gym context, but you don't win. Actually, you won't improve if you win every time, right? Because you need that pressure. You need to be the one who's worse to actually learn and make progress. But again, even if you feel like you are not doing well, or you're not the best one in your gym, or not the best of your group of friends or whoever, you still have lessons and value to offer to other people who have been doing it even less time than you. Or maybe even, again, it's somebody who's been doing it as long or longer than you, but there's something about your perspective, or just maybe you focused on one area of one technique that you can offer insights that that person who maybe overall is more experienced and better than you, but they haven't come across that before, and you can still offer that to them. So I would say, definitely be humble and don't try to puff yourself up, but also realize that everybody with their own experience and perspective has value and can teach other people things that even if they feel they might not be able to.
Fabulous nuggets to end off this conversation. This is part of the growth. If you feel trash, yeah, that is part of the growth. Expect it. You're going to feel trash many times in whatever you're working on. It's normal. Keep moving forward. Fabulous. All right, Nicholas, thank you so much for being on this episode. And to everyone else, thank you as usual for tuning into the podcast. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Hello and welcome to the Dad Dialogue podcast, the show where we talk about the successes and stresses of becoming a dad and being a dad. My name is Lawrence. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Today's guest is Nicholas. Nicholas is based in Singapore. He actually grew up in America, but is actually adopted out of Korea. So Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us at the Dad Dialogue podcast today. Thanks for taking the time for coming on. Can you just start off by telling the listeners just a little bit about yourself and your family?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on. But yeah, my name is Nicholas Brayman. I grew up in the U.S. in Seattle, but I've lived off and on in Asia for a total of about 12 plus years and have been in Singapore for the past 10. I have a 2-year-old daughter with my wife. My wife is Chinese. I'm actually ethnically Korean. Long story, but I was adopted, so that's something I think we can probably get into later. But yeah, settled here. I work in marketing in the tech industry, and just loving being a parent and a father.
That's awesome. 10 years there, that's quite a long time. So you're feeling settled there?
Yeah, definitely. It's a great country. It's a great mix of East and West. It's not quite as... It's very connected. It's very international. There's lots of expats here, lots of foreign workers, but it still has that traditional. The main ethnicities here are Chinese, Indian, and Malay people, and so it's got a really interesting mix. And people are still connected to their heritage, but it's super convenient, clean, known for being clean, safe, amazing food, all that sort of good stuff.
Mm. Yeah, and the list goes on, I think, for things Singapore is known for, travel, education. It's up there, I know, for a lot of lists. So how have you found navigating the world of having a child with your family abroad? Because obviously your parents, so the grandparents to your daughter would be in America. How have you found that balance?
So my mother-in-law has actually been living with us since my daughter was born. So that's been helpful in a lot of ways, but of course it presents its own challenges. Mm-hmm. And I haven't actually taken my daughter back to the US yet. I'm hoping to bring my dad for a visit to Singapore in the next year or so they can meet. But I actually don't feel a very strong need at this age to bring her back. We've taken her traveling other places. She's been to China, Bali. We just went to Taiwan. But at this stage, taking her back and saying, hey, this is where I grew up, or this is where I went to school, or you used to love this restaurant, she's not going to remember it. So for her, it's just another place to run around and play. Eventually, we'll definitely visit and love to show her the U.S. She's an American citizen. So the administrative side of things was interesting, being born overseas with an American parent and American father and a Chinese mother. Her only choice was actually American, because Singapore is not like the US, where if you're born there, you're automatically given citizenship. Yeah. And then China has their rule is, if you are born outside of China and only one parent is Chinese, you're also not automatically given Chinese citizenship. So we're very happy with her being an American. It's fine, and we're lucky we got to be permanent residents here in Singapore a few years ago. So that makes things like schooling a lot easier. If you're not a permanent resident or a citizen, then you have to go to an international school, which of course is a lot more expensive than the local schools.
I'm glad you mentioned schools. Can you talk a little bit about schools in Singapore? I'm not fully aware. I had a few, with my background having lived in Hong Kong, I knew a few people that had either taught in Singapore. I had a few kids in my class when I was a teacher who had been in Singapore and left to go to Singapore. So there was quite a lot of exchange. But Can you just talk a little bit about the education system? Like, when would they start like a preschool and school, and the general view of schooling there?
It's been a huge learning curve for us. We're also in the process of buying our first house in Singapore. We've been, renting since we've been here. And the proximity to which school makes a big difference and is a huge factor. Singaporeans take their education very seriously. I think it's again, like China and Korea and some of these other countries, that education system is known for being very rigorous. And so people really consider what school they're going to try to get their kid into. And we're talking about primary school. It's not even like middle school or high school. It's from the time they're 5 years old. Which school they're going to go into has a chain reaction down through the rest of their education. Yeah. So we're lucky in Singapore that there's domestic helpers, usually from Philippines, Indonesia, Myanmar. And that allowed us to keep our daughter at home until now for the first 2 years with also the help of the mother-in-law and the ability to work from home and that sort of thing as well. So I'm very grateful for that. I did not want to put her into daycare. I know some people that don't have a choice. They both work outside, in-laws, and they've been in daycare since they're 6 months old or a year old. And my feeling is that she's going to have enough school for the rest of her life. I don't want to push her into it too fast. And so she's going to start what's called Nursery 1 at the beginning of January 2025, which I still feel is quite early.
Yeah, I can connect and relate to that. It was similar to Hong Kong in that it did start very early, and I worked in a local school my first year there, and in the local school, once they're in primary school, like after preschool, once they're in primary school and secondary school, they also go to school on Saturdays. I'm sure people that have sent their kids to daycare for a long time, they know the process of they have to learn to say goodbye. But that doesn't stop, I think, the parent having some of those feelings. Is there anything that you're like preparing for that process? Because that's still very young. Like, how are you approach that?
Yeah, super young. And I feel it even with just how much time I spend with her on a day-to-day basis. The guilt comes in where, she's asking to play with me, but I have a work call or a meeting or what. And so I think it's definitely going to be worse. But I think as a parent, you have to think about what's in their best interest for the long term. And certainly, like you said, no judgment on people who decide to send their kids to school even earlier. People need to work and provide for their families, and that's an important aspect of it as well, even if the kid is too young to understand. The good thing is, everybody thinks their kid is smart, but she's super smart, and I think she's getting a little bit bored at home. So I'm hoping that having the stimulation, and she just had an assessment yesterday. It was for the first time she's been through this type of thing, like testing her of, how do you want to stack these blocks up or push this little thing over here? And it was the first time she's bonded or responded to an adult that she hasn't met before. And she sat in the person's lap. Obviously it's a professional who's very good with kids and all that, but I was glad to see that. And it's made me think that, okay, maybe this preschool thing won't be so bad after all.
Yeah, you definitely have those moments, and I'm glad that you can have that feeling of a little bit of release before it happens, because it is, excuse me, it's pretty nerve-wracking. I also just want to really quickly touch on, you had the mother-in-law live with you, and I know that's quite a common Chinese thing. Did you guys do the Chinese confinement, like when your baby was first born? Can you tell us a little bit about that? I find it really interesting.
Yeah, so that's another aspect of Chinese culture. And I don't think in China, it's a huge industry. It's a little bit different in mainland China than it is in Singapore. So in China, from what I understand, they have confinement centers, which is basically like a resort that most mothers go to for around 4 weeks after the child is born. So the culture part of it is there's specific foods that new mothers are supposed to eat that in Chinese traditional medicine are good for their recovery and getting their body back to being healthy and recovering more quickly. And so that's the traditional part. And now, of course, it's evolved with the way things are in China. 5-star, they come with belly massages and all these treatments and everything for the new mothers. And part of that is care for the baby as well. So the baby and the mom stay in this place together, sometimes with the father, sometimes the father comes and goes. And so you have these, again, extra hands to help, because you know how it is, a newborn mother, they need to eat every 3 hours, they need to sleep every 3 hours. And so in Singapore, so that's what it's like in mainland China. In Singapore, it's a little bit different because usually the confinement nanny comes to your house. And so they stay at your house for 2 weeks or 4 weeks, however long. And they only have certain duties, which includes taking care of the newborn, however much you choose to do that, and then cooking these foods for the mother. And in a lot of ways, again, having been through it, we had a little bit different of an experience. My daughter actually had some complications when she was first born. So she was in the hospital for longer than usual. And I was going and visiting every day. And then when we got out of the hospital, finally, we came back, and we actually, for the first 2 weeks, we didn't have a confinement nanny or a helper or anybody. And at that point, my daughter was used to me. And so she was only taking bottles from me. So I was doing all of the feeding. My wife was expressing milk. And so I wanted to take that off of her hands, because it's hard enough for her. She has to keep up the schedule, right, to regulate the milk supply and all this sort of thing. And it just worked out well that my daughter felt comfortable with me. She slept. I was the one who most of the time was putting her to sleep, as well as feeding her. And so that first 2 weeks, I think, were as tough a 2 weeks as anybody has. She was a great baby, didn't cry a lot, and it was pretty easy to go to sleep. But we did a lot of things like the skin on skin care and that sort of thing. So my schedule was the same as my wife's, getting up to do the feedings and putting her back to sleep. And then after those first 2 weeks is when we had a confinement nanny come in, because I had to go back to work eventually. I'm a new parent. It's just bad. Like, you get, at least for myself, I used to get scared as a new parent, right? Is this normal? Is this just what babies do? Or is there something wrong? Do we need to take her to see the doctor? And so it was also helpful to have this person who's been with so many newborns over the years and has the experience to be able to pass on some of that knowledge to us.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important thing. And I think a lot of parents go through that mental gymnastics of, I'm the parent of this child. I'm the one that knows best. I'm the one that should be doing everything. But then submitting to yourself and sacrificing yourself was like, hang on, there are people in the world that are doing this as their profession, and they've literally helped hundreds, if not thousands, of babies go from a baby to a toddler, or a toddler to whatever. And it's that sacrifice of, yeah, you're the parent and you're going to love him or love her or love him more than anyone. But at different stages, there are different people that are more qualified to look after them than you.
One of the more interesting aspects of being a father that I realized is that it's so much easier to have small talk with people. And like, when you have kids, there's always something to talk about. And as a fellow parent, you know, you go through some of the same struggles and challenges and triumphs and feelings for your kid. And, you know, even at work, like my boss's boss, a lot of our team, probably because the age we all have young kids. And so it's always something, it's nice to be able to connect with other parents on. I never crossed my mind before I became a parent myself that would make you feel so much more connected to other people than don't have that experience, that shared experience.
Yeah, it's true. And the reason why I started this podcast was because I saw the value in that, but also at the same time, small talk is okay. Like, you obviously will talk about, oh, blah, 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 like my son did this or he did that, and this is good, and we're applying to this preschool, and that's the easy stuff to talk about. And I found after becoming a stay-at-home dad, we were trying to find relationships where we could have those conversations, and it was fine. But I just sometimes found, as a new parent in my life, don't know you that well, like you're a stay-at-home mom, and like our kids get on and it's great, and it can sometimes feel a bit isolating. And the reason I started this podcast is that I really don't want any dad out there to feel isolated, because we've got to do this together and we've got to help build each other up. How have you balanced work and being a parent? Is the culture within your company quite driven, or are you able to like balance your time nicely?
So I've worked for 2 companies during the time that after my daughter was born. And so like I think I mentioned when I first introduced myself, I'm a B2B marketer in tech. I was looking after the Asian region at my previous company. Now I'm working after the whole APJ region, so Asia Pacific and Japan, which is basically everything in Asia. So like I mentioned, my current team, there's a lot of young parents who understand, like, even if you need to work late at night, but you can't work during just after school hours, around dinner time. Everybody is understanding and flexible about that, which is great. I think it more goes again back to like my personal feelings of how much time I want to spend with my daughter. I tried it. My daughter loves swimming. I started taking her to the pool since she was super young. So I try to either go on a walk or go swimming with her basically every day that I'm not traveling or out in an event, to have that time together specifically. And then, like I mentioned, that's one of the great things about working from home, is that in between meetings, if I'm going out to the fridge to get a snack or make a coffee, you're able to interact with her for a few minutes, and it's just, you're not gone from the house for 8-10 hours a day, and you don't see them when they only have the time with you in the mornings and the evenings. Yeah, personally right now, my company culture is great, but I think also that if I had to be in the office 5 days a week, or if maybe I had a different boss who was not as understanding, it's also how you manage yourself and manage your time and manage expectations. Even before I had kids at previous roles, I've always been a proponent of this term called, job crafting, where I think in most people's roles, you have some flexibility about what you prioritize, how you manage your workload, what you focus on. And I try to do that in a way that allows me to, for example, from a career perspective, to work on improving or getting better at the skills I think are going to help my career. And I think the same thing can be said about time management and how you prioritize. People talk a lot of the mental health advice and this sort of thing. If it helps for you to go on a walk for 15 minutes in the morning and get out and clear your head, you're going to be more productive going through your day. And so that's all intertwined. And certainly, as of so far the last 2 years, being able to have those few minutes with my daughter, being able to stop work and eat lunch with her and that sort of thing is, I'm grateful for it, because I know obviously a lot of people are not able to do that, but it's made me certainly more mentally healthy and happier and everything else. So,
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome to hear you're able to take that ownership of it and structure it around what you fit, and making sure that your priorities are there, in that you still care about your work. It's important, but you're still going to have it fit around your life and your family. I think that's like a generation of dads now, is trying to take that ownership and working harder, like not longer, and really prioritizing discipline within a work setting and getting stuff done and shutting off, rather than, like you said, that 10-12 hours a day away. And as we come to the end of our time, the question I tend to ask all our guests towards the end is, if you think back to maybe a couple of weeks before your daughter was born, a few weeks before becoming a father, what do you think the Nicholas back then needed to hear? What one piece of advice might you give to yourself before becoming a father for the first time?
I think for me personally, it would be to appreciate every moment. I think I'm quite lucky. So I wasn't the kind of person who, I've always gotten along with kids and my nieces and nephews and whoever. Always enjoyed being around kids and used to be the uncle that would run around outside in the yard with them. But I wasn't the kind of person from a young age who was like, I can't wait until I have kids. I want a big family, or I really want to make that my priority in my relationships and my marriage and that sort of thing. So it was actually a process with us, because I think I became a father at a fairly old age. I was 37 when my daughter was born, and now we're going through the process of deciding whether or not we want to try for a second kid. So it wasn't something that, like, as soon as we got married, we went ahead and tried to have kids. And what's been the most unexpected and the best part of becoming a father for me is that I love it more than I ever could have imagined that I would. I really enjoy being a father. I really love having, my daughter, and I think it's made me a better person. And more responsible person. And I think it's helped our relationship in a lot of ways as well, because I am able to be a good father. And it actually comes more naturally to me to be a good father than to be a good husband, I think. And so that's something that I'm loving almost every minute of it so far.
Awesome. So Nicholas, I really appreciate your time. It was awesome getting to chat to you. Thanks so much for joining us for the Dad Dialogue podcast.
Great. Thank you very much. I had a great time talking to you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for making the time.
Thank you for listening to Before We Get There with your host, Nicholas Brayman. Please like and subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Before We Get There Podcast. New episodes are released every Thursday morning. See you next time.